Thanks so much for joining us for our alumni webinar series, Passions in Practice. We're really excited to have Jack Lamson joining us tonight. Jack is a brew master in New York, and is going to talk about sort of his life in New York, working in the brewery. A couple of things before we get started. Down at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A tab that if you have any questions as the presentation is going along, please feel free to put them in the chat. If it's something that's pertinent to that moment in time in the presentation, I'll sort of pop in and ask Jack. If not, we'll get to them at the end. If you gave us a question when you registered, I have those as well, so I'll be able to get to those at the end of the presentation. We did learn last month that there's also the raise your hand option, so if you would prefer to ask Jack a question rather than submitting it in the chat, please feel free to do that, and then we will be able to unmute you and you can ask your question. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome Jack.
Hey everybody, I pulled out the only piece of Governor's apparel that I currently fit into still. So shout out to Governor's Wrestling. It's a little worse for wear, but I thought why not go into the archive and see what I could find for this webinar. And thank you to Samantha and Dion for having me on this. It's been a ton of fun working with them and being a part of kind of putting this all together. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it. Brewmaster, I'll I'll graciously accept. We're stretching the title of master a little bit. For background on myself, I graduated in 2007, and then I went off to Quinnipiac. And my senior year at Quinnipiac, I was moving into my senior year house. I had a U-Haul full of stuff after living on campus for 3 years, and the U-Haul was parked in the driveway. I think I'd brought one bag upstairs, and a friend of mine who I'd lived with since freshman year of college said, I got this homebrew kit and I was thinking about making it this afternoon. And I said, that sounds a whole lot more fun than unpacking the U-Haul, and I don't have to have it back till tomorrow. So go ahead, let's do it. And that was sort of where my homebrewing journey began, which for a lot of people in the industry is how they get into this. The famous story, of course, is Sam from Dogfish Head, and everybody knows Sam Adams starting in a garage and so on and so forth. With me, that was absolutely the case. I don't have a professional education in brewing or anything like that. Science degrees. Any former teachers on here will tell you that not my strongest suit, but I was talking with my boss at the brewery today about that, and he said, when it comes to breweries, there are really two fields that we fall into. There's the scientific field and there's the artistic field, and we certainly lean a little bit more toward the artistic. And that's what I think is so much fun about brewing, is that it's a blend of science and art. We put together these recipes and we put together what we want to do, but then on the scientific side, there are certain steps that we have to follow in order to achieve that goal and to get to where we want to go. And so that's that blending that I think is really fun with it. But I'll say, going into all of this, that I can tell you the how of what we do, and I'm going to walk you guys through that tonight and try and give you a little bit of a look into the day in the life of me and my brewing career at Mean Max. A lot of the why. I can tell you why we do it is because that's how we do it. The scientific background of it, trying to extract certain enzymes and things like that, not 100% my forte. I can tell you that we do make good beer. We've won a couple of regional New York State awards that have sort of verified that for me and given me a little bit of confidence in what we do, and people coming back, rating us on Untapped and things like that. So I'm confident in what we make, and I hope that I can give you a little bit of insight into how we do it. I've got a little presentation that I'll kind of start with you guys here as I can share my screen. There we go. So this is kind of a look into our brew house, a little bit of it anyway. We've got another basement section downstairs that houses more fermenters. and we'll get into a little bit of what that means, which is a good introduction here. Some basic things to know, just more than anything, things that'll kind of help you understand what I'm talking about as we go through the process. A barrel of beer, that's the unit of measurement that we use when we talk about how big a brewery is or how much beer they make. That's 31 gallons of beer. And the keg is a half barrel keg. That's the one that you might have seen at a party or at a bar, or seen loading in and out of a truck. It's the one that's about yay big around, and that holds about 15.5 gallons. So two of those together gets you one barrel of beer. The 1/6 barrel keg, a pony keg, or a sixtel, those are your 5-gallon kegs. What you might have seen if you've ever picked up a keg from a local distributor or from a local brewery or anything like that, and taken that home with you with a little pump tap handle. That would be about 5.16 gallons. So we distribute in both. Some of our lighter beers, more popular beers, we'll put out in that half barrel format to local bars and restaurants, and the more specialty beers, higher ABV beers, and things that most of what goes out to our local accounts, our restaurants, and other bars in the area will be in that 5.16, that 5-gallon sixtel keg format. As far as the brewing operations go, a mash is when we put the grains, the crushed grains, into the water, extracting the sugar out of them at its most fundamental level. Brewing is yeast eats sugar, produces carbon dioxide, CO2, your bubbles, and alcohol. And so that's what we're going for. When we put those grains into the water, we're trying to extract as much sugar out of them as we can, and then leave the actual grain behind and produce a sugary liquid that's called wort. And that is unfermented sweet beer that we will add yeast to. The yeast, again, kicks off that fermentation process, consuming the sugar and leaving behind delicious Mean Max beer. Fermenters are what the beer goes into for that process. It's a vessel that's used for fermenting, and in some cases, carbonating beer. All of those stainless fermenters that you saw in the last picture on our first floor, those are all what we call uni tanks. With our plastic fermenters in the basement, those have to go into a stainless steel bright tank, which is where we carbonate that beer. And that has to, obviously, we can't carbonate in a plastic vessel. We'd pop it. So that's what we do with those ones downstairs. The upstairs ones, we ferment the beer in there, and then we add CO2 and make the bubbles right there in those same vessels. This is Mean Max Brewing, as seen from beautiful downtown, historic Glens Falls. We are kind of right in the heart of downtown. Think anywhere really that you might be familiar with in the Govs area. I mean, anywhere from Newburyport to Amesbury and anywhere in between with these kind of old historic buildings. They're very long, very narrow, like what you might see at a lot of bars and restaurants in the Boston area as well. This is a look inside. We've got seating for about 60, 70 people with a capacity to hold a lot more than that standing up, table rearrangement, things like that. You can see those fermenters there in the back right corner, the stainless steel ones that I mentioned. Those are new to us since we've upgraded the brewery. The back bar also just got a big rehab and a big remodel, I should say. And then in the back left corner, that's where, behind the green wall there, that's where the actual brewing takes place. The back bar, as I mentioned, you can see 12 of our 22 draft lines that we have there. So for a small brewery like we are, and I'll get into a little bit of the context that shows you our size, supporting 22 draft lines is something that a lot of people, whether they be industry-wide or just kind of tapped into the beer industry in general, they come in and ask, how do we support 22 draft lines as a small brewery? And the answer is that we brew a lot. We don't brew a lot at a time, but we do brew a lot of beer, a lot of days of the week, where some breweries might only brew once or twice a week. We're 3 to 4 times a week to try and keep up with that. My journey at Mean Max actually started way back in 2017, back when I was still doing the news. I was a news broadcaster right out of Quinnipiac. I was a writer for Channel 7 in Boston. I got my first on-air gig down in Texas, in Wichita Falls, which, if you know where Wichita Falls is, good for you. It's in the middle of tumbleweed country, right in between Dallas and Oklahoma City. From there, I went to Myrtle Beach, and then from Myrtle Beach up to the Albany area and was doing the news there for them locally, but still very involved in home brewing. Once I caught that bug that senior year of college, I never really looked back and brewed beer all the way from Texas to South Carolina up into Albany. And it was a lot of fun. It seemed like every time I moved, I'd kind of pick up a new piece of equipment, and the U-Haul would get a little bit bigger to accommodate a stainless steel bucket that at that point was the only way I was doing it. But I was a member of the local homebrew club in Saratoga, which is about 15 minutes south of where we're at in Glens Falls. For reference, Glens Falls, I should have said before when we were looking at it, about an hour north of Albany, about 15, 20 minutes north of Saratoga Springs, and about 15 minutes south of Lake George. So I was in a homebrew club there, and they said, okay, everybody next month, bring in your best brown ale. Make your brown ale, bring it in, and we'll have some special judges. Special judges turned out to be the owner and at the time head brewer for Mean Max, Matt and Joel. And out of a blind tasting, they picked mine. And the prize for that was that I got to go and brew my beer with them at Mean Max on their professional setup, and they put it on at the bar. And they called it the Breaking News Brown. At the time, again, I was still in news. And it was terrible. It was not very good. It came out kind of looking sludgy, but it was a good learning experience and a lot of fun to do that. My first time brewing on a setup like that. You can see in the picture there on the left-hand side, that was their setup at the time, their kettle and their mash tun. And that was a 3-barrel setup. So producing about 100 gallons of beer at a time, which in the grand scheme of things is not that much. At that point, to keep up with that, we were brewing 4 to 5 times a week just to kind of keep up with what we were doing. And there'd be plenty of times when we had open draft lines. And then I took about 3 years off from knowing them, still enjoyed their beer, still had it every now and then, but didn't really reconnect with them until COVID. And I was sitting around one day after getting done with the news shift, and they posted that because of their tap room shut down and scaled down and the restrictions that they placed on how many people they could have in, they were all of a sudden shifting dramatically toward having more beer in cans and getting more out in distribution. Otherwise, they were facing the same problems that a lot of places were facing. You know, if we can't bring people into our tap room, we need to bring our product to them. And so they said, we need help a couple days a week, a couple hours a week. And I said, well, my day is over at 10 o'clock in the morning most days. Granted, I get up at 3, but if I can make this work, then I'd love to be involved in the industry. I think it sounds like a lot of fun. So I reached out and said, yeah, I can do this a couple days a week if that's what you need. And they said, yep, that's what we need. And so I started going up there and helping them out, getting their beer distributed into cans. And after that, my contract was up at the TV station in early 2022. And I went to the guys at Mean Max and said, I think I'm going to take a break from the news. I'm a little burnt out from it, doing the news from my basement over Zoom, just like this. Got pretty old pretty quick. And then everything was kind of slow to recover. And I said, can you find a spot for me as a brewer? And they said, absolutely. We're looking to increase our capacity. And that's exactly what we did. When I joined, it was about the same size, but with a greater emphasis on canning. And just in the last year and a half, 2 years or so, we've upgraded to a 5-barrel brewery. So that means, you know, going from 3 to 5, we're making from 100 gallons to about 165 gallons, 170 gallons at a time, and canning a whole lot more of it, distributing it to a whole lot more people. And so it's been a nice upgrade and a nice shift in what we were doing, not only in equipment and what we do on the back end, but also in just making sure that our product is reaching who we want it to reach and how. I mentioned the size of the brewery and the size of the company. We're very small. We have about 5 full-time employees, about 10 total when it comes to adding in bartenders and folks that help us for events behind the scenes and things like that. So really small, really kind of locally focused. Everything that we distribute is self-distributed. So everything that leaves Mean Max that goes somewhere else does so in the back of our minivan. That is our delivery minivan. So we'll load it up with cases to go to local beverage centers. We'll load it up with kegs to go to local bars and restaurants. We distribute about as far north as Lake Placid and just south of Albany, and then not quite as far west as Utica, but a little bit out that ways. And then we're kind of right up against the border with Massachusetts and Vermont, both of which are pretty saturated markets when it comes to distribution of beer. So we don't delve into Massachusetts and Vermont at all, really. So kind of up and down the Hudson Valley into the Adirondacks, certainly, and then a little bit farther west. Um, by comparison, our size, to give you a little bit of an idea, Newburyport Brewing, if you've ever been over there, they're on a 20 barrel system with obviously much wider distribution. True North Ales in Ipswich, also founded by Gov's alum, Jake and Gary Rogers, they're on a 30 barrel system, so significantly larger. And for a little bit of added context, Jake and Gary's pilot system, their test system where they test out something new, maybe something small, if they're working on a new recipe, their test system is the size of our full size system. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the scale that we're working with. It's not a major operation, but the advantage to that is that it does give us the opportunity to try something out the same way that Jake and Gary might at True North. We'll try something out, and we've got our process pretty down pat to the point where we're confident in what we make so that we don't, I think in the 3 years or so that I've been there full time and about 5 years total, I can count on one hand the number of times we've said, that didn't really work and gone ahead and dumped it out, which is an important part of the process. We want to make sure that what our customers are getting, be they at the bar or if they pick it up in a can and they take it home, we want to make sure that what they're getting is the best product possible. So very rarely will we say this is just a complete and total miss and go ahead and get rid of it. So it's nice to know that we have our process to the point where we like it, where we can make tweaks and we can go ahead and experiment. If I go out and try a beer this weekend from somewhere that we've never been with a hop that I've never had before, I can go into my boss and say, I tried this, I really like it, and I have an idea for it. And he says, okay, we'll order some. We only need X number of pounds and X number of ounces. So let's go ahead and order a little bit and we'll try it. And last year he challenged us to, for the 12 months of the year, come up with 12 new IPAs. And we did that. We did a black IPA that coincided with the eclipse. That was a ton of fun. We did an experimental IPA with all hops made from the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. So that's been a ton of fun to experiment with those and to really kind of delve into okay, we know that we have our base process down. How can we get funky with it? What else can we try? We're closer to some in size to some of the Amesbury breweries. If you've ever been over to visit some of those, your Sloviticus, your Mill 77, they all operate on about a 5 barrel system as well. So for comparison's sake, go in there and look at how many beers they have on draft. I think 8 to 10 is probably the norm. And we've got, like I mentioned, 22 draft lines, 2 of which are dedicated to sour beers, 1 of which is dedicated to our barrel age program, which you'll see in a video coming up here in a little bit. And that's something that I'm particularly proud of for us as a small brewery, is that we turn out 5 to 6 different barrel age beers every year. And so for a brewery of our size, being so small, to be able to turn out what we're turning out in an extremely experimental and volatile environment in barrels, you're talking about something that was used once for bourbon or tequila or a maple bourbon. We've got a barrel right now that was formerly used as Sotol, which is the Texas version of tequila, same kind of taste, but not derived from the agave plant. So you've got those barrels that come in, have already been used. They were full of liquor, so they're still pretty sanitary, but we add our beer to them and hope that we taste them throughout the process, that maturation process, and make sure that we're getting the flavors that we want out of them. But they have been huge sellers for us, and we've gotten great feedback on that barrel age program. little bit of how the brew day works. I'm going to walk you guys through two programs that we use that really kind of help us do our brew day. The first one is Beersmith, and that's where we build all of our recipes and we track all of our recipes. And the second one's called Brew and Water, and that's how we adjust our water chemistry, which, as any local homebrew store owner will tell you, is the easiest way to affect the overall quality of your beer is to make sure that your water is where you want it. I'll never forget bringing a batch of homebrew into my local homebrew store years ago and saying, I think this is good, but there's just something off. And he tasted it and said, You're using Saratoga water, aren't you? And I said, Yeah, I am. And he said, Well, it's the end of the summer, the reservoir is low, the chlorine concentration is really high, so you need to be treating your water with this. So every month we take a water test. We run through chloride, we run through potassium levels, we run through the pH, and we calibrate that every month so that every month our water reflects what we want it to reflect. So I've got here, this is it's a web version, but the idea is pretty much the same of actually what we brewed today, our New England Double IPA. So we'll go in here, and if we were doing it in the past, from a recipe from the past, we would copy over an old one. But this is kind of built from scratch, and you can see here that we've got our original gravity. That's going to measure the alcohol content of the beer. IBU stands for International Bittering Units. That's going to tell you how bitter the beer is. Think pale ale with a nice bitter bite to it versus a stout with a smooth finish and smooth body. The color, and then, of course, your alcohol by volume, your ABV. So if we were building a recipe from scratch here, we're going to start with a basic two-row malt. That's kind of your bread and butter. And we're going to go ahead and add 300 pounds of that into our recipe. So you can see our ABV jumped up already to 5.1%. And our color over here is right now going to be kind of a pale yellow. We're going to add in some oats, and that's going to increase our body of the beer and also add to some of that hazy quality that we want as we're doing a New England style hazy IPA. In addition to oats, we're also going to do some flaked wheat. Here we are, flaked wheat. We'll do another 40 pounds of that. And so that's pretty much a basic grain bill there for building a basic New England beer. We're going to add in a little bit of some Cara Pils malt, and that's going to increase our head retention, make sure that we get that nice foamy, fluffy white top that we want on the beer, and also help with the body a little bit without imparting any flavors. We'll go into our inventory here on the one that we use at the brewery. We can check a box that says, show me only what I have. So if we're building a recipe from scratch and we want to see what we have down in the basement freezer as far as hops go, we'll start with that and kind of build our recipe off of there. Today we used El Dorado hops, which is sort of one of our favorites at the brewery. And we added these in the whirlpool phase, which is as the beer is cooling down. We're going to add these in versus adding them in during the boil of the beer. And that hops are traditionally added in 3 stages. You've got your bittering hops, your flavor hops added in the middle of the boil, and then your aroma hops added at the end. So depending on what you're choosing, you can really affect not only the bitterness of the beer, but the flavor and the aroma as well. Lots of people will do those late hop additions later in the beer, like what we're going to do today with our whirlpool hops. And we're going to add those in during that phase to try and really extract some big aroma without imparting any bitterness. That New England IPA, you want to be not necessarily creamy, but certainly not bitter like a pale ale or an ESB or something like that that has a bite on the front of it. We want something smooth, pillowy, soft. And that's what we're going for with those whirlpool hop additions. In addition to El Dorado, we also did some Simcoe today. We're going to add those in at the exact same rate at 36 ounces of Simcoe for 30 minutes during the whirlpool. And you can see the other thing that we're adding here is those IBUs, those bitterness units. And so we're approaching the high end of what we want here for our bitterness for a New England IPA. Actually, I should have pointed this out. Down here, because right now that's what it's telling me. We're way too high, but that's because it thinks that we're brewing an alt beer. That's certainly not what we want to do. So we're going to change this here, New England IPA, looking a little bit better. We're going to add in our yeast. We use British ale yeast. Tons of different places that you can get it from these days. Um, Not the most locally sourced thing, just because it tends to come from big labs and things like that. Guys who have perfected these and grow them for generations and then ship them out to you. The other thing that we're going to do is we've got our base beer here with our hop additions, but then we really want to punch up the flavor and we want to punch up the smell of this beer. So you've probably heard of dry hopping before. We're going to do a double dry hop with this one, and we're going to do the same thing, our El Dorado, and we're actually going to do even more in our dry hops. So we're going to dry hop this into our primary fermentation. We're going to dry hop this 3 days into fermentation. And then we're going to do the same thing with our Simcoe hops. And we're going to add those in a dry hop as well. 3 days into primary. I think you guys kind of get the idea a little bit. You can see that what that didn't do was add to any bitterness at all, because we're adding those hops as fermentation is going on. We're not contributing to the bitterness of the beer at all. And so that's really just going to, as I said, punch up that flavor, punch up that aroma, and give it that New England IPA quality that we really want to do. I'll save you guys going through adding it again, but we're going to do that a second time when we crash the beer, when we make it cold, when we add the bubbles. We're going to add a second dose of hops in there, and that's the double dry hop. Mash is over here. This is going to show us what temperature and how much water we want to add in to extract the sugars that we want to, so that the yeast has something to eat while it's cooking. And we'll let that go ahead, and we're going to do 100 and about 122, 123 gallons of water into this. And then afterwards we'll sparge it. Sparge means to rinse the grain afterwards. So we'll extract as much sugar as we can, and then we don't want to leave anything behind. So we use kind of a sprinkler on top of the mash tun, and we put water down on top of it and let it flow to the bottom and out the bottom of the mash tun, so that we really try and get all that sugar that we can out of the beer. And this will give us a little bit of an idea of what we want the beer to look like. It's going to estimate that our gravity here is at 1059, and that we want to get all the way down to 1013 or so, thus giving us about a 4.7% beer. Obviously, all of that can change depending on how much grain you add, how much hops you add. We tend to kind of shoot a little low, and then the yeast works extra hard, gets us a little bit over where we're projecting. So ABV on this was projected at 6.7%. A little bit on the high end for what we'd like to do. But again, this is a double IPA. So with a little bit more grain in there, we might get into that 7% range. The other program that I really wanted to show you that I think is pretty interesting is this free program called Brew and Water. And what this does is this allows us to adjust our water chemistry. You can see on this kind of click down menu here, it asks, what do you want your desired water profile to be? So if we were making pick anything out of here, if we were making a Vienna lager, we tell it we want to make a Vienna lager, and it says your calcium to magnesium ratio should be here. Your sodium ratio should be here. Sulfates, chlorides, bicarbonates, so on and so forth. We're really reaching the upper level of my scientific understanding here, but it does make it very easy for you, because what you do is input your grain over here, how much grain we're going to use, what kind of grain we're going to use, and then you go right back and tell it what you want your grain bill and your water adjustments to look like. So this is where we'll adjust the pH of the water. That's one of the biggest things that we do. We add lactic acid to lactic acid to lower in certain amounts to lower the pH, and we'll build off of that and kind of trust that what this tells us is what we want it to be. For some of our beers, we do use a custom water profile that we've built specifically for our New England IPAs. But if you scroll down to this table here, it'll say, well, if you're making call it a dry Irish stout, you probably want your water to taste like a Guinness. you want your water to at least start with that and then trust that what your recipe that you're putting into it is what you want to get out of it. So it says, well, the water profile in Dublin here has 120 parts per million in calcium, 4 parts per million magnesium, 12 parts per million in sodium. So we can select that Dublin water profile as we're building it up here, and it'll tell us based on the grain that we put in, based on what our water inputs are. We get a lab water test, and I told you that we test our water once a month, and it'll tell us based on your water and based on the water that you want, here are the chemicals that you need to add. So we've got gypsum, we've got Epsom salt, calcium chloride that we'll add into the beer to adjust that water profile to get us where we want to be. And that's what you saw actually right there on the lower left-hand side. That is the salt addition. So you can see some powders measured out there, and the cylinder in the middle there has our lactic acid in to adjust the pH for what we were doing today. On the side of the brewery there, on the other picture, that is our specialty grains. Everything from Vienna malt to caramel malt that is kilned up to a certain degree to affect the color of the beer. I'll show you, for example, just how quickly we can change this beer. You can see in the little picture of it up there on the top right-hand corner that right now we're at a little bit of a yellow color, that yellow golden that you might want in a New England IPA. But if we take some chocolate malt here and we add in, remember, we've got 300 pounds of our base pale malt. If we add in 10 pounds of chocolate malt, watch how dramatically that changes the color of the beer. And that's because that's kilned up to a certain degree and roasted to a point where it's going to impart that kind of color that you might want on a beer like that. If we go in and change this down to as little as 3 pounds, you'll see that we're getting more toward a coppery color. And so that's how we go in and play with the beer that we want. And it says, if you look down here at this range that we want to be in, we told it we want a New England IPA. And right now it's saying your color is way too dark. You're outside the range for where you want to be for a New England IPA. So we'd go in and, well, we don't want any chocolate malt in a New England IPA anyway. So now we're back into range. And that's how we go about building a recipe. And then as far as the actual brew day goes, we start off with building those recipes or pulling up the recipe that we're going to build for that day from something. What I made today was Rooster Comb, which is one of our award-winning New England IPAs. So I kind of pull an old recipe from that and just recreate it. We want some consistency in our brews, and we want to make sure that we're giving you the same Rooster Comb that you had on draft or that you had in a can, that you get the same thing again. So that's another big part of our process, is that repetition. So once we've got a plan for everything that we need, we go to our grain, we go to our salts, we measure everything out, and that's when we start getting into the mill. And so I'll play you guys this video. This is the, and I'll try and turn the volume down here so I can nail over it. But this is our grain mill. We dump the grain there into the top, and it flows through a crusher, and that breaks the hard outer husk of the grain, which doesn't have the sugar. The good stuff that we want is inside that individual grain husk. So that runs through a mill that crunches it all up, makes it a little bit finer than sawdust or sand or something like that. It's a little bit thicker than that, you know, because we want to, again, leave that grain behind. We don't want to suck any of the actual husk into the beer with us. We want to just get the sugar out of it. So that's the grain going through that mill right now. We'll dump it into the top. It runs up a screw in that auger into our hydrator at the top. That's where it mixes with the water as it comes in. And that's it. That's mashing. So as soon as this is done, we get it all stirred up. Then it's a lot of hurry up and wait. A lot of the brew day, I tell friends and family, you're welcome to come brew for a day, but be prepared to do a lot and then to sit around for a while and then do a lot. And then while we're waiting for it to boil, you're sitting around for a while. And when I've got people in there with me, you know, that's when it's time to sit around, hang out, you know, maybe talk through the process. Obviously, I've got other responsibilities in the brewery on a daily basis that keep me busy. But when you come in and watch, you're like, is that it? And it's like, well, that's it for now. We've got about an hour. So we'll let that grain soak in that water for about an hour. Again, letting that sugar come out, because that's what we want. And then we get to our sparge and our transfer. That sparge process is where we're, again, rinsing the grain and we're taking the wort out the bottom of the mash tun, that vessel that you saw there with all the grain and the water in it. And that's got a false bottom on it with a bunch of tiny holes in it. So that again, we're hoping that all we get is liquid and we shift that over to the boil kettle. So I'll walk you through that process. There's our mash tun with our grain in it. You can see that we've already got the water level a little low. And that's because we're pulling it again out the bottom. We do put it through a fine filter bag as it goes into the pot here and into our pump. We use this small pump to get it out of the mash tun into this vessel here that takes it through a larger pump, through some hoses, and into the boil kettle, which we've already fired up. Ours is a direct fire brew house with 2 burners underneath, and then we'll fill it up to our desired level, take some readings, make sure that we've got the amount of sugar that we want. We want to make sure that before we get really into everything, that do we need to make any adjustments? There's only so much you can do at a certain point. If you get to everything's in there and your gravity or your expected sugar level is not where you want it to be, you can add a little bit of regular table sugar on the back end. The only problem with that is that the more of that you add, because it's completely 100% fermentable, it's going to dry the beer out and make it taste a little boozy. So we've had times in the past where we're like, we really want an extra point out of this. We want this to be an imperial IPA and we've only got 8%. Let's get it to 9. Let's add just a couple of pounds of cane sugar, of regular table sugar that'll help us get over that hump and get us to where we want to be. The part that I make friends and family do every time they visit when they say this is boring is the grain out, because after we're done with the mash, we need to get all of that spent grain, which remember at this point is mainly just husk and not a whole lot else. We need to get that out of the mash tun, spray it down and clean it. And we actually give all of our spent grain, hundreds of pounds of it at a time, to a local pig farmer. Makes great pig food, I guess. So he comes and he picks it up and takes it for us, sprays down the buckets and brings them back the next day. And we haul it out in those 15 or 17, I should say, gallon tote bins that you see down there in the bottom left. And I haul them outside, leave them at the curb, and I text the pig farmer and say, your grain's ready to go. Come and get it. The next morning, I've got empty bins waiting for me. So it's a great relationship for all of us. And we're happy to help them. We're happy that he comes and takes that grain away from us so that we don't have to deal with it. I mentioned adding hops in 3 stages. Making a New England IPA today, we're going to do those Whirlpool hop additions. So this is while the beer is cooling down, we're going to add these hops. And because it's running through a filter and running through a chiller, we put our hops into one of those mesh bags so that we don't clog everything up. You'll find different setups on different breweries. This one works for us, again, because we don't clog everything up. So what you'll see here is those Whirlpool hop additions in those bags getting added into the kettle. And we'll let those steep for, like you saw me in the building of the recipe, we'll let those steep for about 30 minutes, extract as much of that flavor as we can. And this is when the brew house starts to smell really good. And so that's really the only hop addition that we do for a beer like this. It changes with every beer that we do, when we add the hops, how we add the hops. Most of the time they're just dumped into the kettle. It's just for those Whirlpool additions, with the temperature of the beer coming down, they don't have the ability to break down those little green hop pellets. It's a condensed version of the leaves that you might have seen, growing on vines in videos where people are crushing up the hops in a Sam Adams commercial. After that, once we've got it all cooled down, we're going to transfer to our fermenter and we're going to pitch our yeast on top of it. We did a double batch brew day today, yesterday and today. So we are brewing into our biggest fermenter, our 10-barrel fermenter. That is the beer running through those gray hoses. That's our heat exchanger and our chiller. So cold water, oh shoot, accidentally jumped ahead. Cold water runs through the black hoses and in an opposite direction of the beer. So hot water, cold water in through the black hose on the top there, and the hot water out the black hose on the bottom. The beer, hot beer, coming in through the bottom and out the other side into the fermenter after being cooled down, running through that plate chiller. And that's the fermenter that we're going into. So we did 1 batch yesterday, 1 batch today. So for a double batch of one of our most popular beers, that's what we like to do. We hook it up. That green tank on the left there is oxygen. Yeast loves oxygen, so we like to give it, and we want to make sure our yeast is as healthy as possible. So in there, you'll see that little black line in there. That's a called a oxygenation stone. It's got a ton of little micron holes in it, and we bubble oxygen through the beer so that it is a ripe environment for the yeast to go into and eat when they're all ready to go. To the basement we go, and the other side of the brewery on days that I'm not brewing, most of the time we're processing beer. That means putting it into kegs, putting it into cans, what have you. As I mentioned, the increase in size, we've increased our capacity on canning, and as such, we bought a new automated canning machine. You'll see there, that's kind of our planning board. That's what we have in process right now. 2 batches of lager and a Vienna lager, a stout, all kinds of stuff, keg storage here in the back hallway, and our keg washer, fully automated keg washer. So you throw the kegs up there upside down, you push a button, you walk away, and you've got clean and sanitized kegs. Those plastic fermenters are what we use for lagers. It's what we used to use for everything. Since we got the stainless ones upstairs, that's been a huge upgrade for us. And you can mention, or you can see the barrels that I mentioned over there on the left. We'll get another look at them in a second, but that's our canning line. I mentioned fully automated canning line. All the labels still get attached by hand. And I'll show you that here in a couple of minutes on a separate video as well. Rye maple bourbon barrel, tequila barrel, Sotol barrel, a red wine barrel that we did a barley wine in. And then we followed that up with a dark sour in that same barrel as well for some really unique characters. The beers that go through those plastic fermenters, they have to come into this room and into that stainless steel vessel. That's the bright tank. That's where we carbonate those beers that go into plastic, transfer those in there. Those are jacketed with cold coils, gets them nice and cold. And the CO2 adheres to the beer and gives you the nice bubbles that you want out of a beer. I mentioned that new canning line that we got, and that's only been up and running now for about a year. I apologize, these were shot vertically for social media, but I'll give you a little bit of an idea. The cans rattle down that whale tail shaped infeed. We can fill 3 cans at a time, where we used to be able to fill 2 cans at a time manually. And then it takes the cans and augers them down this machine, applies lids, and then goes ahead and seams them for us. So that's been a huge increase in production for us. It used to take us about 4.5 hours to do 30 cases. Now we can rattle off 30 cases in about 45 minutes. And you can see how much that automation helps, but it all has its limits because every label of our beer is still hand applied, which isn't all that bad. You can actually spin that thing pretty quick. And that's pretty much the end of it. Goes straight from there, straight out of my hand, straight into your fridge, hopefully. And that's kind of the end of my presentation. So I'll turn my screen back over here so that you guys don't have to look all at that, and let Samantha kind of handle any questions or anything.
Awesome, Jack. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Of
You
course.
whipped us through a very full day. So I will say when you showed the photo of the inside of Mean Max with the flags on the ceiling, it reminded me of Gov's old dining hall with the flags all around.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So if you weren't already thinking that, now every day when you go in, you can be reminded of Gov's.
Exactly.
So I have a few questions and again, if folks have questions, you can put them in the Q&A at the bottom or raise your hand. Who is Mean Max?
Mean Max. Max was a cat. Matt, and the joke is that Max was not mean, Max was misunderstood. The original logo, which we've since updated, it's a little hard to see, but it's the M and the M, and there's some whiskers on there. That was a drawing done by the owner's niece of Max the cat, and that became sort of the logo for a while. But the problem is with the whiskers, the M's, it became pretty difficult to embroider, and thus we switched to the hop cone and the M and M that makes up the cone that has kind of become our new simpler logo. But again, poor Max got a bad rap, but it's okay. He's all right now.
But a bad rap, but a good beer.
Yes, exactly.
What has been the most complicated issues you've had to solve with distribution and to market and scale up your business?
I would say the biggest thing for us is that, as I mentioned, all of our distribution is done by us. So, in order to get our beer out, it depends on our sales guy, who's also our delivery guy, getting that beer to the customers, getting that to the bars, restaurants, beverage centers, what have you. We're not in grocery stores or anything like that. But part of the logic on getting that canning line was that potentially we could hook up with a distributor at some point. The problem with working with a distributor is that you have to meet minimums. And so we're at a point where if we want to grow to achieve that, we might be looking at scaling up the brewing operation again. Excuse me, going from a 5 barrel to a 10 barrel and making 100 and say making 300, 400 gallons of beer at a time versus what we're making right now. There are some times that we make a batch and we fly through it and go, all right, next time we'll do a double batch of that, like I did today. And other times where we kind of sit on it for a little while and we're like, okay, maybe we retool that recipe. Um, and then there are other markets, there are certain states that require you go through a distributor. So those are markets that we can't even break into. And again, with the capacity that we have now, we could reach the minimum of most distributors. I think this is above my pay grade. I wasn't involved with actual negotiations with the distributor or anything, but I know that what they wanted from us would have been feasible, but a little bit difficult. We would have been really kind of pushing ourselves to turn around the amount of beer that they needed to justify coming with a truck, picking up a pallet of beer, and then taking it out for their distribution. So we're kind of right on that fence where we need to move up to the next level and go with a distributor or stay where we're at with a dedicated sales guy who gets our beer out to market.
Are you personally still home brewing or brewing all day at Mean Max's? Are you not brewing at home as much?
I do have a homebrew set up at home. I will say that I definitely did it more before I got the professional toys to play with. Uh, it's out in my garage, so in the summertime, I kind of look at it sometimes, and I'm like, I gotta fire that up again. I think I got an idea, and I used to use it as sort of a test, as a small pilot system or a test system, and now I'm confident enough, and I think my employer's confident enough in the product that we make, where if I have an idea, he says go for it. And if we have a new hop we want to try or a new style we want to try, he says, I don't mind if we make 150, 160 gallons of it and it's not perfect, or we're okay to go back and tweak it next time. Um, and that's, and so that sort of goes back to that question of the biggest issue with distribution is if we go bigger, then we can't test those things, or we'd need to invest in a smaller system because we're not going to go on a 5 and a 10, because it doesn't make sense. Like what the guys at True North are doing, they're on a 5 and a 30. Their test batch is our full size batch. So we're not going to do a test batch. If I come up with an idea, my boss isn't going to say, go ahead and make 30 barrels of that and we'll distribute it. And we're going to test that out somewhere else first. At home, I have definitely fallen off on the homebrew side of things, but still get out there every now and then, where it used to be I had, kegs on deck ready to go for whenever somebody came over. Now I just have Mean Max.
Yeah, so you still have it. It's just a different kind.
Still have it. Yep.
I have one more question, unless anyone has anything else to throw in. The last one is young Americans are drinking less alcohol. How is your company thinking about this and dealing with it?
It's one of those things that, and I think I have a unique perspective on this, having come from a news background, that definitely got a little bit blown out of proportion. The headline, Gen Z isn't drinking, was a little bit, that became the headline on Yahoo. It became the headline, on Good Morning America. And it's not as dire. Shocking that, the news and media publications made it sound, like it was some catastrophic thing, but it's not that bad. But it is definitely a noticeable trend. And what we've done for that, we offer a complete mocktail menu. We offer the Athletic brand non-alcoholic beer in the brewery. Producing your own non-alcoholic beer is a little bit of a equipment investment. You need to be able to filter out and boil off the alcohol while maintaining the good flavor of the beer. And so we're not equipped to do exactly what we need to do to produce the kind of quality product that we would want to put out. But I will say that what we have done is shifted dramatically in what we're making. We make a lot more beers that are in the low ABV range. So that last beer that you saw with the dog on the front, that's Nora. It's a dark mild and it's 3.5%. But it is dark as night. It has a ton of flavor, a ton of roasty malt in it, and a ton, I mean, Guinness is, down in that sub 4 range as well. So it doesn't, and a lot of people think of Guinness and they go, "Oh, I don't like dark beer. It's heavy. I don't want to, have to chew it or have dinner with my beer." And the fact of the matter is that those beers, a lot of those traditional English styles in particular, are low ABV. So we took all of our double IPAs from about 8.5% down to 7, just because they weren't moving as much. You'll always have your locally, you'll have your Trilliums and you'll have your tree houses who are going to specialize in those big beers. And that's fine. And people will still seek those out. But for your average local brewery, you might find that they're shifting more toward low ABV, NA options, mocktail options, and things more in that range. And so we've started producing a lot more lagers and a lot more of those low ABV traditional English styles, like an alt beer, like a ESB, like a dark mild, like a Vienna lager, that are sort of 5% and lower. And we've gotten a lot of good response from that.
We've got a couple more. This is what happens. I threatened to say that we're done, and it doesn't happen. A couple of folks in Byfield giving their best. Coach Hunt was on earlier. He needed to get off to dorm duty, but he appreciated the governor's wrestling shirt and hopes to see you at some point soon. And Brad Herrick is on as well. Brad works for facilities, and Brad and Jack grew up in Amesbury together. So
Good.
Jack would also, or Brad would love to have you come back to Byfield, maybe with a couple of brews.
Tell them
So
I'll be around. I'll be around this weekend, Brad. I'll make sure to hit you up.
there you go. And then another question is, do you miss news?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say whenever somebody asks, I miss the hours from 4:30 to 8 when we were on TV. That was fun. Everything outside of that, not so much. One of the reasons why I got sort of disenfranchised with news was that one of the things that was fun about it was that we got to talk about something different every single day. And then COVID happened, and then Trump happened, and then Cuomo happened. If you're not familiar with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, got kicked out of office, sexual harassment scandal, so on and so forth. And then the 2016 election and COVID, it became all that we talked about all the time. That coupled with the separation from the station, being in my basement, I was like, this isn't that much fun anymore. I will say the thrill of being on live TV, it doesn't get old. It's fun. And I got my start doing that at Gov's with Gov's News in the basement of the PAC, and through an independent study with Joe Repsinski. And I was very fortunate that Gov's let me do that, and that it really helped me solidify. I went into Quinnipiac knowing that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so, unlike a lot of college students and even high school students, I was like, I'm going to be a broadcaster. And I did it for 10 years and it was fun. And I've still found a way to kind of scratch that itch at Mean Max, because none of them ever want to do media. So when we opened our second location, which is down in Troy, New York, which is just a tap room, not another brewery, when we opened that and we had media inquiries, my boss would just forward me the email and say, "You were on TV, you deal with this." And I'd say, "Okay, great. I'll go do an interview talking about a new location for us." Sure. And I handle all of our social media, and that kind of scratches that itch for me a little bit and lets me still feel like I'm part of the broadcast community, I guess.
Well, we're really excited and happy that you were able to do this for us tonight and got over maybe some PTSD from your Zoom days in the basement. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for walking us through, life at Mean Max, and look forward to seeing you back in Byfield. But thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Our next Passions in Practice is December 9th. Leslie Lacey, class of 1991, will be with us. She's an attorney in Louisiana representing foster children. She's also started her own nonprofit based on the work that she does down there. So she's going to join us and talk a little bit about the work that she's doing. So hope that you can join. In the meantime, happy Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful time with your families and looking forward to seeing you guys, whether it's in person or on screen. Thanks. Bye bye.